Thanks for joining me today for Think Big with Michael Zellner, powered by Platinum Jewelers. My guest today for episode 121 is Alan Blomquist. Alan was an executive producer and director in the entertainment and movie industry for over 30 years. He has worked on and was the executive producer for many movies that you know, including Walk the Line, Book Club, A Dog's Purpose, Of Mice and Men, and the Cider House Rules, and so many more. He graduated from the University of Michigan with a bachelor's degree in film production in 1976, and he is here today. We're going to talk about his exciting career. He's worked with so many different amazing actors, directors, and producers. Alan, thanks for joining me.
Michael, it's my pleasure.
So
I need to get something straight right away, though.
Okay.
My degree was a Bachelor of General Studies. I ended up with a film major, but I didn't get a film degree.
Okay.
Full disclosure.
No problem. No problem.
I started as an engineer, and in order to keep my engineering credits and still stay in the art school, I had to get a general studies degree.
Oh,
very 70s thing.
Yes. So you're originally from Arlington, Massachusetts, small suburb, just north of Boston. You went to Arlington High School, where a few other famous people graduated, including Oscar-winning actress Olympia Dukakis, comedian Dane Cook.
Right.
What are some of your best memories from your childhood years that still make you smile today when you think about them?
Well, I had one of those kind of idyllic childhoods, right? My father was a fireman. Eventually, he was the fire chief of the small town. My mother was a nurse, but mostly a homemaker. And, we lived in a little neighborhood where everybody just kind of let their kids run wild. There was a big town park just up the road with a baseball diamond, and they'd flood the tennis courts in the winter. We'd play hockey, and, there was just woods to run in and build forts, and everybody sort of let their kids go. And as it got dark, you'd hear some mom calling for Joey or Tommy or Larry or Alan, and we'd all go back and have dinner and do our homework and whatever. It was very easygoing, and it was terrific. I'm the black sheep, though. I'm the only one that left town, right?
Really?
So, most of my friends ended up staying in and around Arlington. They married each other. They work in, insurance or finance or whatever their parents' business. And I went to Hollywood. I mean, eventually I went to Michigan, then eventually I went to Hollywood. And I went to one of my high school reunions, and it was funny because I felt a little bit like an alien. Like, you live in California? They said it was the outer space.
Those were the good times back. I'm about a generation and a half behind you.
Right.
But, being a kid of the 70s and 80s, playing outside, waiting for your parents to yell for you to come home, no worries in the world. I mean, not worried about riding your bike around the neighborhood or anything. Obviously completely opposite of what today life is.
Oh, that's right. I raised kids, and my kids got driven everywhere, and they had play dates, and everything was structured, and it was but again, Los Angeles doesn't have what my neighborhood had. It doesn't have empty lots where you could go build a fort, or woods where you could build a tree house, or, play army. It just, every square inch of Los Angeles is built up with something. If there's an empty lot, somebody buys it and puts up a house. So
people don't understand, though, when you try to explain that to kids about how our life was as kids, that plane, it's hard for them to even grasp it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Every generation has their "you should have been there when."
Sure.
You don't know what you missed. And all you can do is live it for yourself, and you can't project it onto your kids, right? My kids are screenaholics there, So,
yeah, all they do is play telephones and computers and, and video games today.
Yep. God bless them.
After graduating from high school, you decided, as you just mentioned, you head to Michigan for college. What inspired you to head to Ann Arbor to study, film production?
It's one of those things, right? One of those lucky breaks. It was the greatest decision I made, but I had no idea how and why I made it, right? My guidance counselor gave me because I was a pretty good student in high school. You're great in math and science. You should be an engineer. That's what they did in the 60s, right? So here's a list of engineering majors. Which one do you want to be? I'll be that one, And so I applied to a bunch of engineering schools, and I applied to the Naval Academy. My father was really big on me going in the service. Naval Academy, the Coast Guard Academy, Cornell, and Michigan were the 4 schools I applied to, right?
Wow.
My guidance counselor said, you're shooting a little high. I'm not sure you're going to get into these schools. You better have a safe school. And he meant like UMass or, some Boston State Teachers College where a lot of my friends were going. And so my safe school was a little liberal arts school in Pennsylvania called Bucknell. And of the 5 places I applied to, the only one I didn't get into, Bucknell.
Wow. Wow.
I get into the other 4. And I realized as the process was going on that I really didn't want to go into the military. I was changing from a good, Eagle Scout, good kid, blah, 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 did everything everybody wanted me to do, to being a bit of a, more liberal thinker, radical thinker, So I didn't want to give up. At the time, Annapolis was free. Naval Academy was free, but you have to give them 5 years of service. So that's a 9-year commitment when you're 17 years old. It seems like an awfully long time. Right? So I opted out of that, which my father never really forgave me for, rest his soul. And Michigan had this imprimatur because it was, a place that was in the news, right? There was Berkeley, there was Madison, there was Ann Arbor. You heard about these places because stuff was going on there. There was a bubbling counterculture that was happening. And it was a great school. And it was far enough away. I wanted to get away from my father and his influence. He knew everybody in town. So I couldn't get in trouble because every cop knew me, every teacher knew me. It was like, the fire chief's kid.
Right.
So I went to Ann Arbor where there were 100,000 students and I was a complete, anonymous on my own, making my own way, which turned out to be great for me, And I had a wonderful experience in Ann Arbor. I made a lot of friends, many of whom are still my friends today. And, I love that place. And if not for the movie business, I would have stayed.
Right.
I was putting myself through school by doing construction work. And by the time I graduated, I had a nice little business going on. And my partner at the time decided he wanted to go back to school. And so he got a master's degree and eventually a PhD and became a professor at Michigan State. So I was at this crossroads at 23 or 24. Do I take the business over myself? Do I use this as an opportunity to try something else? Maybe it's Hollywood. So that's what I ended up doing. And I often think, what would my life be if I hadn't done that? Right. If I stayed in Ann Arbor and was a builder, I'd probably had a great life. But as it was, I had a tremendous life. So
right. I talk about that a lot, the power of a moment in the decision that you make, that one decision that you made, right. How it just obviously changed your complete life.
Well, but the other thing that's interesting when I look back on it is I was 24 years old. I moved to Los Angeles. I knew 2 people here. One was they're both from Ann Arbor. One was a student at USC, and one had moved out a month before me, supposedly to try and get in the movie business. He lasted maybe 6 months and skedaddled back to Michigan.
Right.
Because it's a tough game, right?
Yeah.
But my story was great. So, I look back at it and go, what was I thinking? I had no money. I mean, maybe I had $2,000, maybe. Wow. I drove a drive-away car, which is one of those cars where college kids deliver it so I picked it up at the Oldsmobile factory in Flint, Michigan, and I delivered it to some retired Army colonel in Rancho Park, suburb of Los Angeles. And, I brought all my stuff and, showed up here on a, Thanksgiving weekend, and I was in LA. It's like, okay, what do I do next?
That's amazing.
I look back at it and I go, God, that was incredibly brave. But what it was I didn't know any better. My whole career has been a little bit of success through ignorance, right? You do something because you don't know you can't.
Yeah.
You don't stop yourself because you don't know the rules. You just do it, and logic and ambition and drive and hard work come into it. And it's amazing how often you can break those stereotypes if you apply those things, right? I want to be a whatever, you can't be a brain surgeon without going to school, but there are lots of things you could do just by showing up and putting in the time.
Absolutely.
Malcolm Gladwell says 10,000 hours. that something makes you a master. So I don't know if you ever read that book.
I have not read that book.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Blink, I think it's called. And it's about how fast the brain is and how it makes, split-second decisions. And among the things he talks about is, take that back. It's not Blink, it's Outliers.
Okay.
So one of the things he talks about in Outliers is groups that are successful, what makes them successful. So for instance, in the NHL, 85% of the kids, the people that make it in the NHL are born after January 1st because the cutoff for junior hockey, December 31st. So anybody who doesn't make it is a year older by the time they're eligible. So they're still 16 or 17, but they're the 16 and 11 month version as opposed to the 16 and 1 month version. So they're a year bigger.
Right.
You're older, a year more mature, you're more, and it's true. I mean, so the other thing is that if you apply yourself to any skill and you do it for 10,000 hours, you can become a master. And it talks about how Bill Gates happened to go to high school where there was a data processing hub down in the basement. And he spent a lot of time in the basement just playing around.
Right.
So that's how he became Bill Gates. So it's a great book. I would recommend it. Malcolm Gladwell was a fascinating writer. It's called Outliers.
Outliers. Thank you. You might see my little bookshelf behind me there. I have a lot of motivational books there. That's one I've never heard of. So thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah, Malcolm's an interesting dude.
Did you have a few, film professors there, at Michigan that had an impact on your future career at all?
No. And what I always tell people is, and I don't mean to rag on my professors, they were great. But I think that what happens is, and this is one of my big beefs about film school, is that they don't teach Hollywood production. They teach art. They teach how to make a movie, right? So in film school, 3 or 4 or 5 people make a movie. In Hollywood, 200 people make a movie. Right? So they don't teach that process. They don't teach the hierarchy. They don't teach where you get in to the, process and how you work your way up. They teach you how to expose film. They teach you lighting. They teach you, directing, whatever that is, and acting and, that kind of stuff. But they didn't teach Hollywood filmmaking. So when I look back on it, what they did was they satiated my desire, which I didn't even know I had because I'd gone to school to be an engineer, right? So my process is I start in engineering school and I go from being a really good student in high school to barely hanging on by my fingernails at Michigan because everybody's a really good student there.
Right.
I'm barely getting a C. I'm barely making it. And I realized I don't want to be an engineer. That was some bad advice from my guidance counselor, right? That's not what I want to do. But I don't know what I want to do. So after 1 year, I switched to pre-med. I'm going to be a medical technician, a phlebotomist, or whatever. I don't like that a heck of a lot better. I still have organic chemistry, which I can't master. So I drop out of school because I've had a little row with my father, and he's one of those, you live in my house, you live by my rules kind of guys. And I'm rebelling now, and I have hair on my shoulders, and,
right.
And I'm saying, well, I don't live in your house anymore. And so he says, well, I'm not going to pay for school. I was like, fine, don't. Again, one of those flippant moments where I look back now and go, what was I thinking? Right? But I'll pay for it. So it meant that I had to figure out how to pay for school. Well, out-of-state students pay 4 times what in-state students pay at the time. So, but you can't become an in-state student while you're enrolled. So I have 2 years in. So I drop out to become an in-state student, and I get a job, just a dumb job, running an optical scanner for medical records. I just feed things into this machine with little number 2 pencil bubbles, right? For 8 hours a day. But I take an 8mm film class at night. One of those things where you see the sign on the lamppost and you pull a little, little tab and I just loved it. I freaked out at how great it was. And somebody said, well, you can get a degree in the art school in filmmaking if you want. So I started investigating it, and lo and behold, you could. But I'd have to start over if I wanted to get a film degree. I'd have to go back and get all those art school credits. But they said, because it was the 70s, they said, we do have this degree, Bachelor of General Studies. You take all the classes you have and add, 2 more years on it, and you'll get a bachelor's degree. I don't care if bachelor's degree is bachelor's to me.
Right.
So I went to art school for 2 years and, made films. And in the process, one of the things I learned, to circle back to your question, what I learned was that I had a skill that lots of my fellow students in film school didn't have, which is I was good at going out and making things happen. A lot of the guys were great artists, and they were great cinematographers, and they were great writers or actors, but they couldn't interact with the public. I was really good at that. So when we made a film, I was the one that went and talked the restaurant owner into letting us film after hours, or, the piano showroom allowing us to come in and set up lights and use the pianos, and, whatever. And I look back at it now, and that was producing. And
yeah.
But they didn't teach it that way. They didn't say, you're the producer, you're the director, you're the cinematographer. Everybody's everything, right? So we're all the directors. Yeah, okay, fine. But when I look back on it and I realized what was happening, we were sort of all self-selecting a certain thing. So the big project that I made, 3 of us made, I ended up a producer in Hollywood. One of my partners ended up being a commercial director for 40 years in Hollywood. And the third one ended up being a key grip in Chicago. He was the cinematographer of the threesome. The middle guy was the director. I was the producer. And we sort of self-selected these roles, right? Who knows? But again, I didn't know that's what I was doing. I was just doing it, because
Right.
I was doing it on instinct.
So it's sort of a good thing that your dad said, I'm not paying for school, because then look what happened.
Who knows how any of these things occur,
Yeah.
and what they mean? Why did I go to Ann Arbor? Why did I pick up and move to Los Angeles? What if, and there's any number of what ifs along the way that, could have sidelined me and taken me God knows where. But a whole series of them came together, and, I found myself in LA in 1978. And again, you've done a little research, so you know that I started as a grip, right? Yeah. So, I'm 24 years old, and I get out here. My first job is at a movie theater, a new art movie theater. At the time was what they call a revival house, where they showed 2 movies a night, and they changed every night. So that meant 14 movies a week.
Wow.
And you could go to the movies for free if it wasn't your shift. So as a movie freak, it was like a great job for me. They didn't pay great, but so I toured tickets, and I made popcorn, and went up on the ladder and changed the letters on the marquee for tomorrow night's show. And the first movie I worked on was a movie called Foul Play with Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn, because they filmed at that theater. I don't know if you remember the movie, but
yeah, I do remember the movie. Late 70s, right?
Yeah. There's a scene, 1978. There's a scene where there's some guy who chases Chevy Chase into a movie theater and ends up getting killed. Well, that's the new art. And so I went to the manager and I begged him. I said, get me a job, come on. And they decided they needed somebody that knew how everything worked, so they would pay me whatever they paid me. I can't remember, $50 or $100, whatever. But I was like on a movie set with Goldie Hawn and Chevy Chase, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. So, it's a series of those kinds of happy accidents that make a career,
Right.
And so I stumbled into, people would say, do you want a job? Yeah, what do you got? I'll do anything, Well, we need, grips. We need labor. And what is a grip? A grip is glorified labor, right? It's a technician, but you carry heavy stuff around, sandbags and C-stands and ladders and, big scrims. And, I was a big guy. I'd been a builder, so I had tools, I had knowledge. And so I just started doing that because it presented itself. I didn't know that, I didn't come to Hollywood to be a grip, but I woke up one day and I was a grip. And in those days, the union was very difficult to get into. It was very closed shop union in those days. So there'd been a whole group of non-union technicians, cameramen from Europe and different places, who were very good and very skilled, but couldn't get in the union. And so the movies used to be that non-union movies were just junk. And then they started being better and better because there were more and more people available. And so I got a lot of experience that, I might not have gotten if I'd gotten in the union, because I would have been the bottom guy and I would have been in the perms at a studio rigging, never see an actor. So I was lucky. I kind of got in at a opportune time. I was good and I had managerial skill, sense. So very quickly I matriculated from grip to best boy grip to key grip. And, I clipped right along. But then I was kind of like 2 or 3 years in, I was like, is this really what I want to do? I mean, it was great because I was getting taken on location and they were giving me money and they would give me per diem and I was chatting up the local bartender and it was like, it was 25-year-old kid with, cash in his pocket. It was pretty cool. But I realized relatively soon that it wasn't really what I wanted to do. But I had been on enough sets now to sort of look around and go, oh, I want to do that. And what that was be the first assistant director, which is the guy who stands by the camera and runs the whole thing. He's sort of the field marshal. The director's in charge, but the director doesn't physically move stuff around or tell people what to do other than the actors. The assistant director tells everybody else where to park, when when this car will cross, whether there's a light cue, whatever. You orchestrate all that stuff under the director's direction, but you get to, manipulate all these pieces, right? And so I made the unheard of move from key grip to first AD, skipping over the set PA, second AD, first AD steps. I just skipped all those and went across the sky bridge because I didn't know you couldn't do it. Again, you're not supposed to be able to do what I did, but I did, right? And the way I did it was I had matriculated up into better and better pictures, better quality, better budgets, real actors, whatever. I went back down in the elevator to the basement and started off in the basement as an AD. And the trick was, because I had done all those movies as a grip, I was often the most experienced one on these low budget movies, even though I'd never been an AD before.
Right.
I'd been on 20 sets. The people who were making the movie had been on none or 2. So I could, fake it till you make it. So that's what I did. So the first one was tough. The second one was easier. The third one, I was an assistant director. And the hard thing then was to give up all the money and the work that came to me as a grip, because my phone would still ring and they'd say, oh, come on, just do this one movie, And I was like, no, I can't, because every time I do a movie, one, I take myself out of the market for 6 or 10 or 12 weeks, right? And 50 to 100 people leave going, oh, you should hire him. He's great.
Yeah.
And I just get more grip work. So, it's what you and I talked about once about by saying with John Elving, 50 friends have 50 friends. Well, that's true, but you also have to figure out how to use those connections, because if you use them incorrectly, they will not service you the way you want, So it's like, I don't want to be a grip. I have to stop. And it's so, you're broke and somebody calls you up and goes, you want to just work for, 4 weeks? It's like, no, I'm going to wait because there'll be an AD job. And turned out there always was. So
amazing. One more question about college. You went there when legendary Bo Schembechler was head coach.
Yeah.
The guy won 194 games, 13 Big Ten conference championships in 20-year career. You recently said a few years ago, quote, enjoyed watching Michigan defeat Iowa 10-3 today with 111,000 of my friends in Ann Arbor. Thank you, Clyde and Kieran, for the tickets, unquote. What was it like?
My closest friends, I think is what I said. Yeah. Well, it's a completely different experience when you're a student and you're sitting in the student section. And, Michigan was a powerhouse. I went to the Rose Bowl in 1971, my freshman year. I came out to California. It was my first trip to California. And I came on some chartered bus and I stayed with a family friend down in Venice. And again, it's one of those, I don't know if you know LA, but me and a buddy came and we stayed with my family friend down in Venice. The Rose Bowl's in Pasadena. It's an hour away, right?
Right.
We hitchhiked. You can't do that. Well,
Not
no, you
today.
could. So we did.
Right.
And we had a great experience. So, Michigan was a sum total experience. It wasn't 113 or 10 or whatever it is, 1,000 people now. It was probably 75 or 80 back then. But still, it was a huge deal. Every weekend there was tailgating, there was partying, there was craziness. It was a big deal. But it was also, I was in a film society, so we showed old classic movies and brand new movies, and and I met all kinds of incredibly smart people who, a rising tide lifts all boats, made me smarter and better at everything I did because I rubbed up against them. And a lot of them are still friends of mine today.
That's
So,
awesome.
Michigan, Ann Arbor was a great experience for me. I have tremendously fond memories. I go back once a year, and Clyde, thank you, Clyde and Karen. Clyde's the guy that went to the Rose Bowl with me in 1971. We're still friends.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, he's a very successful lawyer.
You ended up becoming a production manager. What exactly does a production manager do on films?
Well, I'll answer the question this way. I would say there's three kinds of producers. Okay, gave the money, got the money, and spent the money. So every producer is one of those three skill sets, right? So I spent a lot of my career as a spent the money producer, an executive producer, a co-producer, a line producer. They have a million names for it, right? Well, that person either is the production manager or works with the production manager to plan the execution of the movie. So the gave the money, got the money, spent the money dynamic is the gave the money producer is the developer. The got the money producer is the architect, right? Who designs the house or the development or the shopping mall. And the line producer, the spent the money producer is the general contractor. He builds the house. So that's what I did. And the production manager is the detailed part of that. So it's timesheets and accounting and cost reporting and tracking expenses and anticipating cash flow and that kind of stuff. So it's all the minutia that goes into making a movie. So my path, which was a little bit not unconventional, was grip to key grip to first AD to production manager to line producer to producer to got the money producer. So it was a kind of an odd path, but first AD to production manager is the normal thing. That's what most ADs either become directors or production managers. And so I became a production manager partly because the kinds of movies I was working on as a first AD, I was often working in partnership with a production manager who wasn't as savvy as I was. And when you're the guy on the set and you need 20 picture cars and you show up and there are 3 and you go, what are we going to do with it? That's all I could get. It's like, that's not an answer, So I was like, I can do that job better than him. So I promoted myself out of a sense of, desperation sometimes almost. I loved being a first AD. I hated giving up that job, but I saw production managing as moving up, and I felt like it was something that I could do, having watched other people do it poorly. I always tell people that there's 2 ways to learn. One is from somebody who's really good, and smart, and pay attention to what they do, and the other is working with somebody who isn't, and kind of go, okay, I don't know what to do, but I know I'm not doing that and that and that.
Yeah.
And so I became a very good production manager and a well-regarded production manager because I'd come from the crew, and the crew knew that.
Yeah.
So when I would interact with them, I would, why do you need 5 guys? Explain to me why you need 5 guys, because I think I could do it with 2. So, and this is what I would do. What are you doing? Oh, well, yeah, I guess maybe you're right. And then it was like, a certain amount of respect. It's like, oh, okay, fine. He knows what I do. He's willing. He told me if I need 5, he'll give me 5, but he's not giving me 5 just because, I was too lazy to design it out all the way. And I like that. I like being a crew-centric production manager, line producer, because I believe that that's how the movie's made. There's a lot of people who do what I did, and they spend all their time schmoozing up, and I didn't see it that way.
Is that one of the biggest learning experiences that you got early on in your career was, schmoozing with the people and developing really good rapport? Was that part of it?
Again, everybody does it differently. What I found worked for me was doing it that way, having a relationship with the cameraman and the production designer and the editor and the costume designer and the people who are going to make the movie, because I can make a budget and I can make a schedule. And if it's unrealistic, it's going to blow up. But if I can get those 4 or 5 key players to participate with me in designing the house we're going to build, it's going to go smoothly. You're not going to have the painter show up before the plaster's dry. I mean, that's really the job, right? It's all about, organization and efficiently spending money. A lot of people that are production managers think that doing a great job is having a lot of money left at the end. Look, I have all this money left. I don't look at it that way. I always thought, if I have 75 cents left in the cash drawer when I'm done, then I've done a good job. You told me I had a certain amount of money to spend, I'm spending it. I'm not saving it, I'm spending it. Now, I will not go over budget, because, especially when I first started out, I was on projects where if you went over, there was no more money. You were SOL. And there's a thing called the completion bond. You know what a completion bond is?
No, sir.
Okay, so it's basically budget insurance. There are companies who will give you a bond that says this movie will cost X dollars. We guarantee it. And if it goes over, we'll pay the overage. Right? So that's fine, except that they now are they're the budget police. So they show up and they have the right to fire anybody, including the director, if things are going, because they don't want to spend their money, right?
Yeah.
So I always had tremendous respect for that. If I tell you I can do something for 5 million or 10 million or 25 million or whatever, that means something to me. I don't just say it and then whatever it's going to cost, whatever it costs. There are a lot of people who do what I do, who they blow right through the end of the runway. And, somehow Hollywood always covers up and makes it okay. And, you hear these, stories about movies going wildly over budget and stuff. No way, not my thing.
Are you shopping for a new watch, an engagement ring, any kind of jewelry at all? What's up, Memphis? This is Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Grizzlies, encouraging you all to shop where I shop, Platinum Jewelers here in Memphis. Platinum Jewelers has a big selection of earrings, stockable rings, luxury watches, necklaces, bracelets, really whatever you need. 9387 Poplar next to Fresh Market in Germantown. So if you need anything jewelry related, go to my spot, Platinum Jewelers.
So,
in 1985, you went from production manager to producer for the action film Heated Vengeance. It stars the late Richard Hatch. For people that don't know that name, I mean, he was a great actor. You might remember him from in the late 70s, Battlestar Galactica. That's where, and I know he was on soap operas and on a lot of other stuff too. That's a huge jump. How did that jump for you happen to go from?
That's not really the movie. Okay. I mean, I know that you're following some timeline that you've seen printed someplace, but
right.
Well, that's factually correct. It's not really what changed my career. I was working for a guy, Joe Wolf, who financed the first Halloween movie. And he took a video company called Media Home Entertainment as payment for a bad debt from a low budget filmmaker named Charlie Band. And he turned it into a huge operation, because he was one of the first guys in the VHS business when it was becoming a VHS business. And so Heated Vengeance was one of those movies that he was doing for this media company. And I was sort of the in-house go-to guy. So I sort of organized that show and made sure it got off okay, but I didn't really produce it. I really didn't necessarily even earn that title. I just was awarded because, I did the job for the head office. The story that you're looking for is I was working on a tiny little PBS show called The Lone Star Kid, starring James Earl Jones and Charlie Daniels. And I was working as the first AD, and it was in Austin, Texas. And it was a It's a true life story of the 12-year-old mayor of Crab, Texas. And it was directed by Anson Williams. And it was a, job. It was just a fun little job down in Austin, Texas. But the gal who was my second AD got a call from Taylor Hackford. She had worked on Officer and Gentleman with him, and he wanted her to come work on this new movie he was getting ready to produce. And she said, I can't, I'm pregnant, I'm going to take time off to have my baby, but you should meet this guy I'm working with, he's great. Again, you never know which conversation, which connection, which. So I finished up in Austin and I came back to LA and I met with Taylor and he hired me to be the production manager on La Bamba.
Oh, wow.
86. And that movie changed my life because number one, it was the biggest budget I'd ever worked on at $6.5 million. Two, I was the low budget expert. They were all a bunch of studio people who had made these big, giant $20-30 million movies and had never made one at $6. And I kept saying, you can't do it the way you are used to doing it. You got to retool the factory. And the movie cost 6.5, which is what we had. It was a huge success. Everybody loved it. And Taylor said, you're coming with me. You're line producing my next studio movie. And that was a movie called Everybody's All American with Dennis Quaid and Jessica Lange.
Yeah.
$25 million. So I went from 6 to 25 in a split second. And to the point where I was like way over my head, right?
Right.
This is a great story. So I go and I meet with the people at Warner Brothers and they say, okay, you're Taylor's guy. That's fine. You got the job. It's yours. And they hand me a budget. Now I'm used to working on budgets that are 10, 15 pages long because there's not a lot of money, right? They hand me this budget. It looks like a manuscript for a book. And so I just take it and go, great, thank you very much. And I leave and I'm going, what do I do with this? It's like getting one in a foreign language. You can't read it, right? You don't know what it said. Right? So I call this buddy of mine who is, I've worked with a couple of times. I did a movie called Iron Eagle with him. And he was the head of accounting at TriStar at one point. So he's totally, fast with all this stuff. I said, I need your help. He said, okay, let's have lunch. So we have lunch. I walk in and I sit down and I put this thing on the table in front of us. He goes, oh, okay, I know what your problem is. You're totally intimidated by that, right? I go, yeah. He goes, well, here's what you should do. Go home, get a highlighter pen, and go through this big, giant document and highlight all the things that look familiar. And what you'll realize is it's the same budget you used to. It's just been pumped up full of air. There's a lot of detail because there's more money, there's more people. And every time you add detail, you add height to the stack of papers.
Right.
And it was like, God damn, it was like the Rosetta Stone. Right now I could read the document because I had the Enigma machine. All of a sudden I had an Enigma machine. It was like, I could read the budget, right? So that I did exactly what he said. And all of a sudden it was like, yeah, it's $26 million, but it's all the same stuff. Caterers, trucks, grips, costumes, hotel rooms, travel, the number, there's more zeros at the end of every line. So it adds up to a bigger number, but it's all the same stuff. It's like the difference between building a garage and building, a development, right? It's still the same. You have to dig a foundation. You have to pour the concrete. You have to let it cure. You have to put up the frame. You have to put on the roof. You have to, make it waterproof. That's what it is. It's making a movie, right? So I was lucky because I got to crawl before I walked and walk before I ran, right? So I was on these little movies, practicing getting good at the process. La Bamba was an opportunity where I got to show what I had to people who had way more experience and way more clout than I did. And they recognized what I was bringing to the table enough to bring me with them. And, Bob's your uncle. Now I have a paid ad on the, my name's on the poster and, I have legitimacy in the studio and, so I'm off and running and I start making studio pictures. So.
I loved Everybody's All American '88. I was 20 years old when that movie came out. Well, that's a great movie.
There's a fun story behind that one. So originally, and I'm sure Lynn Sittler.
Yes.
Okay, she'll tell you this story. Originally, we were going to shoot the movie in Memphis.
Really?
Yep. And Ole Miss, Oxford was going to be the football stuff, and Memphis was going to be the town where she's the Magnolia Queen and Blue is the, the successful Black businessman, blah, blah, blah. And we went there and we set up all the stuff and we were, humming along. And then we got a call, Jessica Lange wants to do the movie, but she's not available till January. So we went from a September movie to a January movie. And the weather in Memphis all of a sudden was against us.
Yeah.
So we packed up and went to LSU because it's warmer further south, and set up Baton Rouge and LSU as our place. And we were the first big movie that was ever going to shoot in Memphis with Lynn, and then we left. So we kind of left her at the altar.
Oh.
And she was very freaked out, and she was like, "I'm going to lose my job." And I said, "Well, then come work for me down in Louisiana. I can't help you. I got to move. The studio's telling me I got to move." So,
was it going to be based on Ole Miss or Memphis State as the player back then?
It was fictional anyway. LSU was called Louisiana in the movie, if you think about it. It's not called LSU.
Okay.
It's called Louisiana. It has an L, but it's not, and it's the right colors, but it's not LSU.
Right.
This wouldn't have been Ole Miss, but it would have been Ole Miss. We would have used the stadium and the campus and the whatever, right?
Right.
And again, that's one of those almost, right? We got really close. We had, deals with hotels and, we were scouting locations. And then all of a sudden, we're out of here.
And it's amazing. Dennis Quaid ended up filming, I believe, in '88 Great Balls of Fire here in Memphis.
That's correct. Yep.
I met him. I was in line at the New Daisy Theater to go see some blues show. And a friend of mine and I were in line. And all of a sudden, I see this guy walk through the front of the line with this short hair, attractive girl. And I said to my friend, "That's Dennis Quaid." And he goes, "No, it is." I said, "Yeah, it is. I know him." As I remember him from Dreamscape from '83, a really good movie he did. I thought was really cool. And we went in the New Daisy looking for him, because starstruck. And he wasn't anywhere downstairs. And then they had this little area upstairs, this little balcony. And we walk upstairs and he's with Meg Ryan. And my friend wanted to sit there and have like this long conversation with them. And I was, I know. And so I was like, he was so nice.
He's a sweet guy.
They both gave us their autograph. And he said to my friend, "Hey, yeah, Meg just got into town. We're sort of just chilling." He was just trying to be subtly "Hey, just leave us alone."
At a certain point, it's a pain in the ass to be famous because you can't do anything.
Right.
You can't go to a show or get a coffee or sit on the river and watch the boats go by because somebody wants to talk about all the movies that you've made, how much they love them.
Right.
Leave me alone.
Right. And I grabbed my friend. He's trying to talk to him about guitars. And I said, "Hey, we need to go. They want to be by themselves." And I never forget him when I'm walking away, he looked at me and he winked at me, basically saying, "Thank you."
Yeah. Thanks for getting the guy out of here. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. So we're making All-American in Baton Rouge at LSU. And it turns out that transportation has rented Dennis and I the exact same rental car. It was like a champagne colored Ford Galaxy or something, right? And I would come out at night after working in the office and there would be these notes under the windshield wiper for Dennis. College girls who were trying to get Dennis to call them up. And it was so I would collect them and the next morning I'd give them to Dennis. I go, "Dennis, I got these for you." So they thought my car was yours. So
that's funny.
We would laugh.
I bet. Yeah.
The star.
Yeah. Super good looking guy. Yeah. I can understand all those girls wanting to be around that.
I always joke that the line producers are like plumbers, right? People need them when they need them, but they don't really, you're not invited to the fancy party.
Right. I didn't know that you did Iron Eagle too. Louis Gossett Jr. Is that right?
Yeah. I was the first assistant director on that.
Yeah. I like that movie too. The early to mid '90s were, huge for you in your career. First as an executive producer on the '92 movie of Mice and Men with Gary Sinise and John Malkovich. I think Gary also was the director of that film, if I remember right. Next year, you did the Oscar nominated What's Eating Gilbert Grape with Johnny Depp and Leonardo DiCaprio.
There's an interesting connection there. So I did Mice and Men, which was a wonderful experience. Gary was great. Those guys together were great. We put, when you do what I do, or when you do what I did, you never know what you're going to get until you get it, right? You put a whole bunch of people, 200 people together, and sometimes it's great chemistry and sometimes it's a bag of cash.
Sure.
And that was one of the ones where everything was just spot on. The place we filmed it in Santa Ynez up north of Santa Barbara, amazing. The crew and the cast were wonderful. And we had this wonderful setting that we found where this farm and ranch welcomed us in, and we basically just took the place over. It was great. But I went in to meet on What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and Lasse Hallström loved the fact that I have a Swedish surname, Blomquist. And Peter Hedges, who wrote the book and the screenplay, was just in love with Of Mice and Men and couldn't stop talking all through the interview about how great it was and what was it like, and tell me stories about Malkovich. And so one movie gets you another one if things fall the way they're going to, right? And so I got Gilbert Grape because of Mice and Men, and I went on to do 4 movies with Lasse, and they're all terrific movies and wonderful experiences. He's a great guy and a great director.
You're in your late 30s at that time. What was it like working? You're around, you started off in your 20s around A-list actors.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
What was what like?
The being around a lot, working with such big A-list actors. Did it have an impression on you, or are you just so focused?
One of the things you have to learn if you're going to have a career that has any length to it, significance to it, is you got to have some professional distance. If you sit around going, "Ooh, wow, I just love you," and no one takes you seriously. That's number one. And number two, if you are a sycophant, if you just attach yourself to famous people, occasionally those people go on and have great careers because they ride in the coattails of some famous person, right?
Right.
But I never wanted to do that. I wanted to make movies. I got offered a couple of jobs along the way. Taylor Hackford offered one, actually, to be the head of production, where you're in charge of 4 or 5 or 8 movies at the same time, and you're the one that oversees them. And I told him at the time, I said, I really don't want that job, because I feel like that's the job of checking people's backpack as they get on the bus to go to camp. I want to go to camp. I want to make movies. I don't want to supervise other people making movies. And so learning to have a healthy respect for directors, producers, actors, especially famous actors, studio executives, you got to have some professional distance. Got to show respect, but you can't be in awe.
Sure.
A lot of these people are bullies. If you show fear, they will eat you up. But if you push them around, they'll get you fired. So it's a tricky dance, of enough respect that they feel respected, but not so much that they're walking all over you.
That makes a lot of sense.
And along the way, I've made friends with a couple of them, and a couple of them are still friends of mine today. But, hanging out with famous people is very complicated for the reasons you were just talking about with tennis. They're never not under siege.
Yeah.
So,
the old saying, Michael Jordan used to say he couldn't even go to the park with his kids. You have all that money, you can't take your kids to the park. Wow.
Well, and people say, how come they fly private? It's like, try and fly commercial and spend the entire flight being accosted by people.
Right. You spoke of John Elkington. I reached out to him and told him I was having you on, and he said, how did you come up with that expression, 50 friends have 50 friends? Because he said you're always thinking of ways to help your friends.
I have no idea. It's, I'm one of those guys who, I have a bunch of those kinds of sayings that have sort of come to me, and I repeat them over and over again. I don't know. I think, to be honest, I think it started from I think there was a shampoo commercial or something, Pert or something, where it was tell a friend, and the screen broke up into a bunch of squares, and somehow it came out the other side with me saying, because in the freelance business, right, there's no advertising, there's no real hierarchy. You don't get the next job from seniority. You get the job because somebody thought, I should call Michael Zellner. He did a good job for me before. Who do you like? Oh, you like Michael Zellner? I'll call him. If you don't impress people and make the connections that get you the next job, You won't get the next job and the next job and the next job. And as a freelancer, that's what it's about. It's all about, what have you done for me lately, right? So you realize that one of the things you want to do is cultivate those relationships, but you don't want them to be phony. You don't want them to be fake. I only call you when I need something, because those are the worst, right?
Right.
So what you do, especially as a producer, my job, I always tell people that my job is setting everything up. The first day of filming, once they start rolling the camera the first day, I sort of don't have anything to do if I've done my job right. Because I've put together 200 people who are skilled technicians and really good at what they do. Actors are over here, makeup's here, costumes are here, transpo delivered everybody. There's a caterer fixing the food. It's like a symphony, right? And I'm the conductor. And if they're playing the tune correctly, I got nothing to do, right? I'm there for when stuff goes wrong, because somebody's got to fix it. Buck stops somewhere, right? So one of the things you realize is you're only as good as the depth in your Rolodex. So when something goes wrong, you better know who you can call.
Yeah.
And so I got really good at that. I had a really good Rolodex, and people helped me and liked helping me, and I paid them back, and I, was there when they called me. And so I would joke with John, because John is the builder, developer version of me. And we realized that once we started talking. We came together because Lynn brokered a marriage between us, because I was doing Walk the Line. And the story there was, I came on, I took over for somebody else who had started the movie and had to leave because he had a family emergency. So I came on the movie, and at the time, the budget was, I think, $36 million. And the studio said they would not greenlight it unless we could get it to 30. And it was before the real proliferation of tax credits, which now are everywhere. It was the early days. There really weren't a lot of tax credits. There was one in Louisiana. And so we were trying really hard to get the budget down, which was a big challenge. And Louisiana was offering us, 25% rebate on anything we spent in Louisiana. And so there was big discussions about taking the movie to Shreveport. And the filmmakers, the producer and the director, husband and wife team, did not want to leave Memphis. This is where the movie was set. We're shooting the movie in Memphis and Dyess, Arkansas, and all the places where it actually happened. Okay, well, we got to get the budget down. And so we put a little, maybe a lot of pressure on Lynn and the Film Commission, because, they really couldn't compete, right? They didn't have war chest the way Louisiana did. But Lynn went nuts. She started hustling every person in Memphis that she could. And one of the people she hit up was John. And she got him to give us free office space on Beale Street. It was an old radio station on the second floor. I forget, it was above Andy's.
Alfred's,
right? Yeah. And they were starting to build the FedEx Forum behind us. And so, we walk into this empty space. It's been a radio station. It's still got control panels and all kinds of stuff. It's like, these are going to be our offices. Okay. And the rent is $0. It's like, that helps. And so we got all kinds. She got the governor to give us his plane to scout locations up in Nashville. And, she really stood in her head to make the movie keep the movie in Memphis. And, again, one of the things that you learn doing what I do, you go along and you make a movie and you bump up against 200, 300, 500 people doing it. And then you go away and you might never see 495 of them again. And 5 of them might become your friends for life. And John was one of those guys. We bumped up against each other. We had this connection that we didn't really understand, but I liked him. He liked me. We respected each other. I dealt off the top of the deck. I didn't hustle him. I told him what we were doing. He was thrilled to help. And, I got his son Fletcher a job on the movie. Fletcher had a, 5 or 6 year run in the movie business, because he was so good that everybody said, that kid comes with us. And he did. He left town. He worked in New York. He was like, the The
I didn't
darling.
know that. Wow.
Oh, yeah, yeah. He was the darling of the locations department. Yeah. And he could have been a big star. He just decided he wanted to come back to Memphis.
The
Red
movie
Family.
Memphis had movies here in the 90s. I think The Firm, that was filmed here, The Client, The People versus Larry Flint, and then someone did, and I don't understand all the tax credit stuff. Did something changed? I know those were Grisham movies.
Yeah.
Mostly.
What changed was other people started wooing the productions other places, and Tennessee never really could compete. They just didn't.
Right.
Tennessee is a conservative place, and the legislature always felt like it was Hollywood welfare. Why do we have to give money to Hollywood? They're all rich.
Yeah.
And Georgia didn't think that. Georgia said, "Hi, come here. We'll give you 35% of everything you spend as a tax credit." It's like, okay,
right.
Even the movie stars. Yep, even the movie stars. So it used to be when it first started, Louisiana was the first one, and it was the only one, right?
Yeah.
And then other people, New Mexico and Massachusetts and different places, started trying to compete. And sometimes, like they did in Iowa, and they did it so badly that they had to shut it down because people were buying cars and financing them with tax money from the state. I mean, there's some serious crooks in business, and so a lot of places had them and lost them, and North Carolina had it and lost it and brought it back. Pennsylvania's had it, run out of money, and so part of the thing is, if you do it and it's popular, it's an expensive operation. New York does it. So sometimes they're so successful at giving money to production to get in there that they're spending money 2 and 3 years in advance, getting the allocation from 2 years from now, because they want the project here right now. And it's a paper thing, because there's always going to be taxes, there's always going to be money.
Yeah.
Think about governments, right? They always have money. But there are certain places where they just say, we're not doing that. And Tennessee was one of them,
Missed out on a lot.
Yep. And they've been brought around a couple of times. They stepped up for Nashville, but they had to do a special legislation thing to keep them. And so it's a very tricky thing. And it used to be an afterthought, and then it became a driver, right? And there's two kinds of rebates. There's cash, where they literally just give you a check. And then there's tax credits where, okay, so you spend $25 million and they give you a tax credit for 3 or 5 or whatever it is, right? But you don't owe any taxes in that state. So what you have to do is you have to sell it. You have to find somebody who has state taxes in Tennessee or Louisiana or New Mexico or Georgia and sell it. So in Georgia, lots of people sell their tax credit to Coca-Cola. They don't get 100 cents on the dollar. They get 80 or 85. And there's a broker who gets 2 or 3 for putting the deal together. And Coke buys $1 worth of tax credits for 90 cents. The broker gets 5, and I get 85. But it's 85 cents for nothing, for showing up.
Right.
And there's some big money on those Marvel movies,
Is that why Atlanta and New Orleans are so big now, because of that?
Exactly why. And you can sort of trace it. Albuquerque, New Mexico, probably number 3. Boston is up there. New York's probably 4, or 3 or 4. Maybe New York might be ahead of Albuquerque. And everybody else is way down the road. It's like the, presidential things, right? The 2 candidates are vying, and then there's all these other people that have 1%.
Sure.
That's everybody else. That's Iowa, that's Ohio, that's Montana. Now, every now and again, you get one that's a darling, right? So Yellowstone started in Utah at the Park City Studios in Park City, because Park City is Park City, and the filmmakers loved living there. And it looked like the West, and it was a lot of really great stuff. And the ranch was always in Montana, but the movie, the show was in Park City. And then Utah ran out of money. And so they went to Montana and said, if you can come up with money, we'll move the entire production to Montana. And Montana went, you got it. And so they took Yellowstone to Montana. So it's 100% in Montana now. But again, Montana isn't a real hotbed of production most of the time. It now has a darling show. Utah has always been a player, but again, not a top 5 player, but a player.
Right. You had several films that you were involved with in the 90s, A Little Princess, Cider House Rules. And then in 2000, you did the movie, you were a producer of a movie I like called Bounce. It was Ben Affleck and Gwyneth Paltrow. About a man switches plane tickets and then the guy dies. It was sort of a weird plot to that movie.
Well, the guy who wrote it and directed it is a very talented filmmaker. He had done a movie called The Opposite of Sex. His name's Don Roos. And he wrote this script, and it was really smart, and it was really difficult, compelling. And it was like, because he set his characters in a very difficult situation. What happens to Ben Affleck, who's a bit of a cad at the beginning of the movie, right?
Right.
And he goes there to try and do something nice, which is basically check on the guy's wife and kids, and he ends up falling in love with her, but he doesn't tell her.
Right.
So it's a real character dilemma. And it was interesting. We ended up reshooting the ending because in the original ending, he was out of there. She ran him off and he was a bad dude and he was gone, right? And the audience at the preview screening rebelled. It was like they didn't want to see that. They wanted them together at the end. So we had to reshoot one where she agrees to take him back and forgive him and let him in her life.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine the difficult decisions on so many levels that you have, being an executive producer, like something like that, having to reshoot something. How are you able to, if possible, try to keep everyone happy? Is that possible?
Well, not usually, not everyone, but you try and keep as many happy as possible, and you try and keep the more important ones happier than the less important ones, because they're the ones that are decision makers. They're the ones that are going to get you your next job or badmouth you out of your next job.
Right.
But you never know who you piss off is going to cost you a job or get you a job. Like I said, when I got La Bamba, it was because my second AD sang my praises. So you never know. You try and treat everybody fairly and nicely. What I always do, my default position is always, I work for the movie. So if it's good for the movie, I will fight for it. If it's bad for the movie, I will not. So when people come to me with their own agenda and they want to do something that I don't think is smart, I don't support it and let it fall from its own weight. If they have such clout that they can make it happen regardless, then I'll do it. I mean, I'm here to make it happen. If you as the producer can get the studio to pay for that, I'll do it. But I'm not going to go fight for it because
right.
I think it's a dumb use of money and time. So how do you keep them happy? You just do the best job you can. And if you're respecting who everybody is and what their part of the process is, it generally works out.
Makes sense.
I always say I work for the movie, which is what I do. And that's the default. That always gets me off the hook, because if somebody doesn't like it, I go, it's what's best for the movie. What are you going to do? You want me to screw the movie up because it makes you feel better? Can't do that. You can fire me, but I'm not doing that.
Right.
But I also, I try and work for the director. The studio hires me, but I work for the director. And the reason I do that is because it's what the studio wants, even if they don't know it's what they want, right? They oftentimes think that they want you to go there and be a traffic cop. You tell that guy he's, one of my other expressions besides 50 friends is, my two favorite words in the movie business are, or what? And that came from a story a friend of mine told me. He worked at the bond company, right? The completion bond company. And he was the guy that they would send down to the set when the set was out of control. And he got called into his boss's office, and the boss said, you go down there and you tell that SOB director that he's done shooting Friday or else. And the guy said, or else what? And then the boss was like, I guess they'll be shooting on Monday. That's the thing. If you're the person that gets sent in to do that and you have no power, it's a joke.
Right.
You wag your finger and then they just go, right. Sure. And in Hollywood, there's a lot of people who can just go, right. You tell Brad Pitt or you tell, Martin Scorsese, you tell, we're not. And they go, yes, we are. And then they call the head of the studio and guess what? They are. And you're sent to Siberia or fired or whatever, right? So, when people always say to me, you have to do this or else, I always say, or what? I mean, are we not going to shoot tomorrow? Are we not going to fly that actor in because you're mad at them? Well, yeah, and they grumble and they leave, and
Sure.
do what has to be done, and they're mad. So you don't please everybody, but you try and please as many people, and the most important people. There's a hierarchy. You want the studio happy because they're the ones writing the check, but sometimes you have to tell them no. And the trick is how to do that, when to do it, how that information is passed down. No one wants to be told no, but there's a way you can tell them.
Right.
It's going to be better. I know it's going to cost more than you wanted, but it's going to be better. You're going to like it. And it's, there's a million versions of that story. When we were doing Cider House Rules, we needed, you've seen that movie, yeah?
Yes, sir.
So we needed 4 things to make the movie. We needed an apple orchard, we needed the orphanage, we needed a period train, and we needed the ocean. Those are the 4 things you need to make that movie. Everything else kind of. So in Western Massachusetts, we found a working apple farm, which had a cider house where we shot it. There was a closed state mental hospital with 77 buildings on 2,000 acres that we could have for free because it was owned by the state. And 45 minutes up the road, there was a period train that we could do in Vermont, where we could do the arrivals and whatever. But there's no ocean in Western Massachusetts. So we can drive to the coast and do it in, Hingham or someplace south of Boston on the water. But it's going to be pack up the company in Northampton, move them to Hingham, unload, load in. It's going to cost a day. And then when you're done, you're going to have to pack up and drive. It's 2 hours, which there is no 2 hours, right?
Right.
So I go to the studio and I go, I want to rent a plane, 727. And I'm going to fly to Bar Harbor, Maine, which is where the story's set. They go, what's that going to cost? I go, $67,000. That's ridiculous. I go, okay, let's do the math. A travel day is $125,000. So you spend 67, we can fly from Northampton at 7 a.m., land at 8:30, be on the set at 9 and shoot there, stay overnight, shoot the next day till 5 or 6 o'clock, get on the plane, fly back to Northampton and check everybody out at 7:30 in Northampton. Cost you 67,000 instead of 125, which is better. Oh, let's do that. And everybody's going, how'd you get a plane? How'd you get a plane? I go, it's math. At a certain point, it's math, and it's how you deliver that information. Make it their decision. You want to spend the money, I'll do the travel day.
Right. And you make everybody happier flying instead of having to drive.
Oh, I mean, they were thrilled and Maine was a way better location than we would have found in Massachusetts. There would have been water and sand.
Sure.
But we wouldn't have had that great Maine coast and all that stuff with the lobstermen and all that. That was all because we were in Maine.
Right.
So
in 2000,
that's how you do that's how you do my job. Is you're constantly comparing, is this good money or is this bad money? Is this a good spend or a bad spend? Do I have the money to do it?
Thankfully that they figured out that obviously made a lot more sense spending half as much money and doing it that way.
Well, we had built it so there was a travel day, but then once I started looking at it, I'm like, wait a second, we could go to Maine. How are we going to do that? We'll fly there. What's that going to cost? 60, and you hear this number, $67,000. Yeah. So
it worked out.
Anyway, interrupted you.
No, that's fine. You reunited with Johnny Depp to do Chocolat in 2000. It was one of your, I believe, one of the biggest, movies of your career. Did like 152 million at the box office on a $25 million budget. Tell us about reconnecting with him and a little bit about the movie and him in general.
Well, I mean, he's a wonderful guy. He's a very complicated guy, no question. And when we did Gilbert Grape, he was, just beginning to be a star, just beginning to be Johnny Depp. And that was one of those movies where everything came together. All these wonderful people, Sven Nykvist, who was a 70-year-old Academy Award winning cameraman from Sweden. And this great crew in Austin, Texas. We shot at a little town outside Austin called Manor, Texas. And it was just special. And so Lasse Hallström and I connected, and then he asked me to do Cider House Rules with him. And then Chocolat came right after Cider House. So it was more the connection with Lasse than Johnny, right? Johnny interacts with me, but Johnny, on Chocolat, I think he worked 2 weeks. He came to England, he did his thing, and went on about his business. But and Johnny's very eclectic. So when he showed up, he had decided that he wanted to play the guy with an Irish accent. Supposed to be in France, and we're all like, okay. So we got an Irish tricolor flag and put it on his boat, and he's a gypsy who, travels around, and we don't have to explain it. It's just Johnny Depp, and he's incredibly charming, and he can do whatever he wants.
Right.
And it worked.
Right.
And it worked. So,
did I mispronounce it? You said Chocolat?
Chocolat.
Yeah. Chocolat. Okay.
Yeah, French. And it's based on a book. And it was interesting. The book is set in modern times. And one of the things Lasse did was decide that he wanted to make it as a period, unknown period, like the 60s, the 70s. You don't know. It's small town France, so there's only 1 or 2 cars in the whole movie, so there's nothing that gives it away. But,
I knew that when I started researching your life and career, there would be no possible way to get everything that I wanted to talk about in just one podcast interview with you. We haven't even gotten to, movie we talked about. You barely mentioned it, Made Here in Memphis, Walk the Line, which is a lot of things I want to talk about with that movie. Will you come back on for part 2 sometime?
Sure.
Awesome.
Well, I had a whole nother career in the blue collar comedy world.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly what I want to talk about too with those guys. Yeah, because I big fans of Bill Engvall and those guys. There's a lot of fun. Those are funny guys.
Well, that's a fun story because I'm clearly not the obvious guy for that.
Right.
And it came to me because my sons, I have twin kids who are 37 now, but when they were younger, when they were 14, 15, 16, I would take them skiing every year up in Big Bear Mountain, just outside LA. And they would always want to take a friend or 2 friends, or, so I would go to the mountain with 3 or 4 15-year-olds, right? And one year, one of the dads was complaining about, you get to have all the fun. That's not fair. I said, well, come with us. I rented a big condo. You can find your bed. And so he came up and the kids went off skiing, and he and I are sitting around the condo drinking coffee. And he goes, look, he's a lawyer. I represent these comedians and they want to make a movie. You're a movie producer. You should produce it. And I'm like, who are they? And he tells me, I've never heard of them. I've heard of Foxworthy, but I'd never heard of the other 3.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in Boston. I went to Michigan. I make, Cider House Rules. What do I know from blue collar comedy, right? But I researched it. And at the time, Foxworthy hadn't been on TV in 10 years. And he was still selling $5 million a year of merch at Walmart.
Oh, wow.
Hats and beer koozies and books and greeting cards and you name it. He was the spokesman for Shoney's, and he was this and he was that. And I was like, a light went on. I went, there's a big audience for this. And it's not who the Hollywood studios usually understand or go to. And it took me 2 years to sell it. I got turned down by everybody, some multiple times. It's a story that lots of people tell about.
Sure.
Everybody said no. Well, that's exactly what happened. And eventually I sold it to an outfit called Gaylord Entertainment, which is based in Oklahoma City. They own the Grand Ole Opry and the Ryman Auditorium, and they have a publishing thing. And they had started a movie division at Warner Brothers. And they had done A Walk to Remember and The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, I think were their 2 first big hits. And so we showed up and they were like, yeah, maybe we can do this. And, the studio never understood it. They didn't believe in it. They would tell me it would sell 250,000 DVDs. They never released it theatrically, which is what we wanted.
Right.
It sold 4.6 million DVDs. And they were like, gee, I guess yes, you did.
Right.
So that was very satisfying to sort of be right.
I bet that was, yeah. Just
after telling them for months and months, there's an audience, you just don't know them.
Right. I'm glad that guy came along, decided he wanted to have some fun and came along to that ski trip.
Well, it's one of those moments. If he doesn't come, I've spent 10 years doing studio movies, which would have been okay too.
Sure.
But it was a really interesting ride spending 10 years with those guys.
Awesome. Well, Matt, it's been so much fun talking today. I look forward to having you back on for part 2 soon. So I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. And I'd like to once again thank our sponsor for the show, Platinum Jewelers today. So we'll talk to you soon, Alan. Thanks so much.
Michael, be well.
You too.